Hey, in this commencement address, Charlie Munger utilizes a backward rhetorical strategy by offering a series of prescriptions for a miserable life. Drawing on a previous speech by Johnny Carson, Munger initially warns against the destructive nature of substance abuse, envy, and resentment. He expands on this list by advising the graduates to embrace unreliability and to ignore the collective wisdom found in history and literature. Furthermore, he suggests that a person seeking failure should refuse to adapt after setbacks and avoid the objective self-criticism practiced by great thinkers like Darwin and Einstein. By ironically championing these negative traits, Munger highlights the essential habits and mental models required to achieve a successful and meaningful existence. I've broken it down into two quick parts for you. The recap. First, we'll give you a high-level summary of his main points so you can get the big picture right away. The legend himself. After that, I'll play the actual footage of Charlie's speech so you can hear it straight from the source. This is the recap.
Hey everyone, so what if I told you that the best way to figure out how to be happy is to first figure out how to be absolutely miserable? It sounds completely backwards, I know, but that's the counterintuitive genius of the late Charlie Munger. Today, we're going to dive into one of his most famous speeches all about this very idea. Let's get into it. I mean, this is the big one, isn't it? It's the question we all ask ourselves. We're always looking for that perfect recipe, that secret formula for happiness. But what if the clearest path forward isn't a to-do list, but actually a not-to-do list? Munger kicks things off with this old piece of farmer's wisdom. And yeah, it sounds a little silly at first, right? But the idea behind it is incredibly powerful. All you have to do is identify the places you absolutely do not want to end up. You know, the bad habits, the toxic ways of thinking, the common mistakes, and then just don't go there. Simple as that. So where did this whole guide to misery thing even come from? Well, the story starts way back in 1986. Charlie Munger was invited to give a commencement speech at the Harvard School of Law. And instead of giving the graduates the usual boring advice, he decided to flip the whole thing on its head. And you'll never guess who he got the idea from. The late-night host, Johnny Carson. Apparently, Carson had once given a speech outlining his own personal recipe for a miserable life. Munger thought, hey, I'm older than him. I've failed more than him. I'm perfectly qualified to add to this list. And that's how his masterclass in what not to do was born. So first, Munger started with Carson's original 3 rules for guaranteed misery. Think of these as the foundational big-ticket items, the stuff that will absolutely positively wreck your life if you make a habit of them. So there they are, Carson's 3 pillars of a miserable existence: chemical dependency, envy, and resentment. Munger saw these as the big, obvious traps that people fall into. Let's break them down one by one. Yeah, Munger does not pull any punches here. He jumps right in with a personal story about his 4 closest friends from when he was young, all of them super smart, full of potential. 2 of them died young, and alcohol was a big reason why. A third became a living alcoholic. His point is brutally clear. This is a path to destruction, and it's open to anyone. And this quote, this really gets to the heart of how addiction works. It's so insidious. The trap is subtle. The chains are so light, at first you don't even feel them. Then one day, you realize you're tangled up and you can't get free. The lesson here is to just avoid that path completely before those chains get too strong to break. Okay, the second highway to misery is envy. As Munger points out, this one has been making people miserable since the beginning of time. You know, it's the only one of the 7 deadly sins that has absolutely zero fun attached to it. It's just pure poison. You're so obsessed with what other people have that you can't even enjoy what you've got. And Carson's final prescription for a miserable life? Resentment. Munger joked that this method worked perfectly for him whenever he tried it. Just holding on to grudges, replaying all the times you've been wronged over and over in your head. It's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And to really hammer this home, Munger uses this fantastic quote from Samuel Johnson. Think about it. Life throws enough tough stuff at us as it is. Why would you voluntarily add this extra layer of self-inflicted bitterness? It's a surefire way to make yourself miserable. Okay, so those were the big 3 from Johnny Carson. But Munger, he was just getting warmed up. He then added 4 of his own personal prescriptions for failure, things he'd observed over a long, long life. Let's check them out. So here's the roadmap for Munger's additions to the Misery Guide. Each one of these is a guaranteed way to sabotage your own life and make sure you never reach your full potential. Munger's first edition is so simple, but it's killer. Just be unreliable. He says if you can master this one habit, it doesn't matter what other virtues you have, it will cancel them all out. People will just stop trusting you. And pretty soon you'll find yourself cut off from all the best opportunities in life. He uses that old fable of the tortoise and the hare to make a brilliant point. If you're an unreliable but talented hare, you won't just get beat by one slow and steady tortoise. No, you'll get outrun by hordes of them. The lesson is crystal clear. Reliability is a superpower, even if you're not the most talented person in the room. All right, the next guaranteed way to be miserable is to insist on learning everything the hard way. Just ignore all the wisdom from people who've come before you. As Munger says, the common disasters you see in life, people failing in business, making dumb mistakes, they're almost always just repeats of errors that have been made 1,000 times before. So, to avoid that miserable path, you do the exact opposite. You adopt the mindset of someone like Sir Isaac Newton. Greatness doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's built by learning from the wins and especially the losses of all the people who came before you. Now this one is brutally effective. Life is going to knock you down. It's inevitable. You're going to face some terrible setbacks. And a surefire way to lock in a miserable life is, when that happens, to just give up. Just stay down. Munger says, since adversity is guaranteed, choosing this response ensures you'll stay stuck in misery forever. And that brings us to Munger's last prescription for failure, which really is the master key to his entire way of thinking. It takes us all the way back to that farmer's wisdom from the beginning. It's all about this incredibly powerful mental model he called inversion. This is it. This is the big takeaway. Instead of asking, how can I be successful? You flip it and ask, what would guarantee I fail? Instead of, how do I build a great company? You ask, what would absolutely destroy a company? By figuring out what to avoid, the right path often becomes incredibly clear. And look, this isn't just some clever trick Munger came up with. The great 19th century mathematician Carl Jacobi lived by this rule. He realized that a lot of really hard problems are actually much easier to solve when you work them backwards. It's a tool used by some of the greatest thinkers in history. And maybe the best example of this in action is Charles Darwin. He wasn't necessarily the smartest guy of his time, but his method was pure genius. He would actively look for evidence that proved his own favorite theories wrong. Think about that. He was trying to destroy his own best ideas. That is inversion. It's a way to force yourself to be objective and see the world as it really is. So Munger's laid out this whole roadmap to misery, this masterclass in what not to do. How does he wrap up a speech like that? Well, he ends his completely backwards speech with a perfectly backwards toast to the graduating class. Just a perfect, witty ending. It's his last little nudge, his final reminder that if you want a happy and successful life, you just have to do the complete opposite of everything he just said. Avoid the big, obvious traps. Be reliable. Learn from others. Get back up when you get knocked down. And always, always invert. And that's what I want to leave you with. Think about some challenge you're facing right now. Could be in your job, a relationship, anything. What would happen if, just for a minute, you stop trying to figure out how to solve it and instead asked yourself, what would I do to absolutely guarantee I fail at this? The answer might just give you the clearest path forward you've ever had.
Now, the headmaster, Beresford, has selected one of the oldest and longest serving trustees to make a commencement speech. It behooves the speaker to address two questions in every mind. One, why was such a selection made? And two, how long is the speech going to last? I will answer the first question from long experience alongside Beresford. He is seeking enhanced reputation for our school in the manner of the man who proudly displays his horse, which can count to 7. The man knows that counting to 7 is not much of a mathematical feat, but he expects approval because doing so is creditable considering that the performer is a horse. The second question regarding length of speech, I am not going to answer in advance. It would deprive your upturned faces of lively curiosity and obvious keen anticipation, which I prefer to retain regardless of source. But I will tell you how my consideration of speech length created the subject matter of the speech itself. I was puffed up when invited to speak. While not having significant public speaking experience, I do hold a black belt in chutzpah, and I immediately considered Demosthenes and Cicero as role models and anticipated trying to earn a compliment like Cicero gave when asked which was his favorite among the orations of Demosthenes. Cicero replied, "The longest one." And it says, "What is Cicero?" However, fortunately for this audience, I also thought of Samuel Johnson's famous comment when he addressed Milton's poem, Paradise Lost, and correctly said, "No one ever wished it longer." And that made me consider which of all the 20 Harvard School graduation speeches I had heard that I wished longer. There was only one such speech that given by Johnny Carson, specifying Carson's prescriptions for guaranteed misery in life. I therefore decided to repeat Carson's speech, but in expanded form with some added prescriptions of my own. After all, I am much older than Carson was when he spoke and have failed and been miserable more often and in more ways than was possible for a charming humorist speaking at younger age. I am plainly well qualified to expand on Carson's theme. What Carson said was that he couldn't tell the graduating class how to be happy, but he could tell them from personal experience how to guarantee misery. Carson's prescriptions for sure misery included: 1, ingesting chemicals in an effort to alter mood or perception; 2, envy; and 3, resentment. I can still recall Carson's absolute conviction as he told how he had tried these things on occasion after occasion and had become miserable every time. It is easy to understand Carson's first prescription for misery: ingesting chemicals. I add my voice. The 4 closest friends of my youth were highly intelligent, ethical, humorous types, favored in person and background. 2 are long dead, with alcohol a contributing factor, and a third is a living alcoholic, if you call that living. While susceptibility varies, addiction can happen to any of us through a subtle process where the bonds of degradation are too light to be felt until they are too strong to be broken. And I have yet to meet anyone in over 6 decades of life whose life was worsened by over fear and over avoidance of such a deceptive pathway to destruction. Envy, of course, joins chemicals in winning some sort of quantity price for causing misery. It was wreaking havoc long before it got a bad press in the laws of Moses. If you wish to retain the contribution of envy to misery, I recommend that you never read any of the biographies of that good Christian Samuel Johnson, because his life demonstrates in an enticing way the possibility and advantage of transcending envy. Resentment has always worked for me exactly as it worked for Carson. I cannot recommend it highly enough to you if you desire misery. Johnson spoke well when he said that life is hard enough to swallow without squeezing in the bitter rind of resentment. For those of you who want misery, I also recommend refraining from practice of the Disraeli Compromise, designed for people who find it impossible to quit resentment cold turkey. Disraeli, as he rose to become one of the greatest prime ministers, learned to give up vengeance as a motivation for action, but he did. Retain some outlet for resentment by putting the names of people who wronged him on pieces of paper in a drawer. Then from time to time, he reviewed these names and took pleasure in noting the way the world had taken his enemies down without his assistance. Well, so much for Carson's 3 prescriptions. Here are 4 more prescriptions from Munger. First, be unreliable. Do not faithfully do what you have engaged to do if you will only master this one. It's a habit you will more than counterbalance the combined effect of all your virtues, howsoever great. If you like being distrusted and excluded from the best human contribution and company, this prescription is for you. master this one habit, and you can always play the role of the hare in the fable, except that instead of being outrun by one fine turtle, you will be outrun by hordes and hordes of mediocre turtles, and even by some mediocre turtles on crutches. I must warn you that if you don't follow my first prescription, it may be hard to end up miserable, even if you start disadvantaged. I had a roommate in college who was and is severely dyslexic, but he is perhaps the most reliable man I have ever known. He has had a wonderful life so far, outstanding wife, and children, chief executive of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. If you want to avoid a conventional main culture establishment result of this kind, you simply can't count on your other handicaps to hold you back if you persist in being reliable. I cannot here pass by a reference to a life described as wonderful so far. So, without reinforcing the sorsar, ni sor por aspects of the human condition by repeating the remark of Croesus, once the richest king in the world. Later, in ignominious captivity, as he prepared to be burned alive, he said, "Well, now do I remember the words of the historian Solon, no man's life should be accounted a happy one until it is over." Yeah, my second prescription for misery is to learn everything you possibly can from your own personal experience, minimizing what you learn vicariously from the good and bad experience of others, living and dead. This prescription is a sure shot producer of misery and second-rate achievement. And you can see the results of not learning from others' mistakes by simply looking about you, how little originality there is in the common disasters of mankind: drunk driving deaths, reckless driving maimings, incurable venereal diseases, conversion of bright college students into brainwashed zombies as members of destructive cults, business failures through repetition of obvious mistakes made by predecessors, various forms of crowd folly, and so on. I recommend as a memory clue to finding the way to real trouble from heedless, unoriginal error, the modern saying, if at first you don't succeed, well, so much for hang gliding. The other aspect of avoiding vicarious wisdom is the rule for not learning from the best work done before. Yours, the prescription is to become as non-educated as you reasonable can. Perhaps you will better see the type of non-miserable result you can thus avoid if I render a short historical account. There once was a man who assiduously mastered the work of his best predecessors, despite a poor start and very tough time in analytic geometry. So eventually, his own original work attracted wide attention, and he said of that work, "If I have seen a little farther than other men, it is because I stood on the shoulders of giants." Or, the bones of that man lie buried now in Westminster Abbey under an unusual inscription. "Here lie the remains of all that was mortal in Sir Isaac Newton." Okay. My third prescription for misery is to go down and stay down when you get your first, second, third severe reverse in the battle itself of verse, life. It's besides, because there is so much adversity out there, even for the lucky and wise. This will guarantee that in due course, you will be permanently mired in misery. Ignore at all costs the lesson contained in the accurate epitaph written for himself by Epictetus. Here lies Epictetus, a slave, maimed in body, the ultimate in poverty and favored by gods. And my final prescription to you for a life of fuzzy thinking and infelicity is to ignore a story they told me when I was very young about a rustic who said, "I wish I knew where I was going to die, and then I'd never go there." Most people smile, as you did, at the rustic's ignorance and ignore his basic wisdom. If my experience is any guide, the rustic's approach is to be avoided at all costs by someone bent on misery. To help fail, you should discount as mere quirk with no useful message the method of the rustic, which is the same one used in Carson's speech. What Carson did was to approach the study of how to create X by turning the question backward. That is, by studying how to create non-X. The great algebraist Jacobi had exactly the same approach as Carson and was known for his constant repetition of one phrase: invert, always invert. It is in the nature of things, as Jacobi knew, that, many hard problems are best solved only when they are addressed backward. For instance, when almost everyone else was trying to revise the electromagnetic laws of Maxwell to be consistent with the motion laws of Newton, Einstein discovered special relativity as he made a 180-degree turn and revised Newton's laws to fit Maxwell's. It is my opinion, as a certified biography nut, that Charles Robert Darwin would have ranked near the middle of the Harvard School graduating class of 1986, yet he is now famous in the history of science. This is precisely the type of example you should learn nothing from if bent on minimizing your results from your own endowment. Darwin's result was due in large measure to his working method, which violated all my rules for misery, and particularly emphasized a backward twist in that he always gave priority attention to evidence, tending to disconfirm whatever cherished and hard-won theory he already had. In contrast, most people early achieve and later intensify a tendency to process new and disconfirming information so that any original conclusion remains intact. They become people of whom Philip Wiley observed, you couldn't squeeze a dime between what they already know and what they will never learn. The life of Darwin demonstrates how a turtle may outrun the hares aided by extreme objectivity, which helps the objective person end up like the only player without blindfold in a game of pin the donkey. If you minimize objectivity, you ignore not only a lesson from Darwin, but also one from Einstein. Einstein said that his successful theories came from curiosity, concentration, perseverance, and self-criticism. And by self-criticism, he meant the testing and destruction of his own well-loved ideas. Finally, minimizing objectivity will help you lessen the compromises and burdens of owning worldly goods, because objectivity does not work only for great physicists and biologists. It also adds power to the work of a plumbing contractor in Bemidji. Therefore, if you interpret being true to yourself as requiring that you retain every notion of your youth, you will be safely underway, not only toward maximizing ignorance, but also toward whatever misery can be obtained through unpleasant experiences in business. It is fitting now that a backward sort of speech and with a backward sort of toast inspired by Elihu Root's repeated accounts of how the dog went to Dover leg over leg to the class of 1986. Gentlemen, may each of you rise high by spending each day of a long life aiming low.